Hi there, my name is Amber Lowery, and I'm a genealogist with the Peoria Public Library and the Peoria County Genealogy Society. Fond du Lac District Library has asked me to give this virtual presentation today for you in lieu of an in-person presentation due to restrictions based on COVID-19. So what I would like to talk to you today about is some intermediate genealogy techniques and tips to deal with after you've hit the first blush of doing genealogy. Genealogy has always been a huge hobby in the U.S., and it's hit a lot of big surges over the last 20 years, especially with the discovery and lowering costs of DNA testing. So a lot more people are getting interested in genealogy, and they do a little bit of research, and then it gets a little hard, and people start to step away from it because they don't know how to proceed with it and how to find more information and how to work their way back further. So what I'd like to give you today is a few tips and tricks that I have done over the last few years that helped me when I was first starting out and I wasn't sure where to go with my research. So if you haven't already, I would highly recommend speaking to any of the older family members that you may have, whether they're local or not. It may mean that you can't get together with them right now, but maybe you can give them a call on the phone or email them or write them a letter. And don't stick to just older relatives. Perhaps there's somebody in the family who's already done a lot of research, and maybe they asked relatives 10 years ago when there was, maybe before grandma died, they were able to ask a few questions and wrote it down. So don't just stick with the older generation, especially if you don't have an older generation to rely on. So reach out to them, talk to them, get their stories, and keep in mind, their information not be completely accurate, but it may all hold a grain of truth. Another tip I would like to offer is to document everything you can now and find a research method and organizing method that works for you. I have tried a number of organizing methods over the years, and I finally found one that works for me, and it's been nearly 10 years. But I will say that I am finding papers from when I first started doing research that I have no clue what they mean because I did not document them well. So start documenting now, make it a habit, so that a few years down the line, when you come across this paper again, or this record, or a little note that you wrote, you know what you were referring to, and you will thank yourself later. Right now, I could kick myself for the amount of paper I have. I'm not joking. I have an inch-thick file of papers that I don't know why I have, because I did not make notes, I did not document them, I don't know where I got them from, and until I rediscover them, I don't know what to do with them. Okay, another tip number 3, is don't just research straight back. Don't just go along your direct line. You need to branch out. That is what a family tree is. It doesn't just go straight up, it goes out to the side. Families rarely moved in a vacuum. You rarely found just one family member who came over. A lot of times, maybe one started it, but then they would send for more family members, and more family members would come. So maybe just your great-great-grandfather came, but he sent back for his wife, or his brother came a year later, or his parents came 5 years later. It wasn't necessarily that they came all together, but they did come. And so you want to research sideways, because sometimes if you had a family that experienced a tragedy, like the mother died in childbirth, the fathers didn't raise the children. They didn't know how. They were working on the farms, or they were working in the factories, so they didn't know what to do with a bunch of little kids at home. So they would actually send their children to family members. So maybe they would send the baby to the sister-in-law who had a baby of her own, so she could feed both of those children. And they'd send the teenage boys over to the brother that had a farm 2 counties away, because the boys could work on the farm and dad could continue to work. And if he remarried, sometimes he would bring the children back with him, but he could not watch them on his own. You also want to look for the brothers and sisters, because if you know that the parents came over maybe together or at a later date, Maybe the family didn't stay with your direct ancestor. Maybe they stayed with the youngest daughter who married well. So, sorry, something moved in my room. That was a little scary. So maybe they moved around to the different siblings and lived with them for a few years. So when you're looking for them or trying to find out where maybe they died and were buried, if it's not local to where your ancestors were, so maybe they died 2 counties over with the middle brother who had a big house and could take care of mom and dad, and they're buried in that county. Number 4, if you're stuck on something, because it really would be really helpful right now if you had the 1890 census. When we lost the 1890 census in a fire, we lost an entire generation basically of research, because children who may not have been born until 1882, therefore not on the 1880 census, may have died by 1890, but then in 1900 mom is saying she had 11 children and only 9 are living, and you don't know what happened to 2 of the children. Or you look at, you had a 10-year-old daughter in the 1880 census, but by 1900 she would be 30 years old, gone, married, and had her own children. But if you didn't descend from that line and you don't know what happened to her, you may have trouble tracking her down. I recommend looking for alternate resources. The Peoria County Genealogy Society happens to have a book at the Peoria Public Library that is an 1888 special census that was taken just solely of Peoria Township. So in my case, my family is from the Peoria area for a long time, nearly 200 years of history. My personal history, family history, is in Peoria. So when I'm looking for people around 1890, I can look in the 1888 special census and find where my families were living, who was in the family, who was all living together. At one point, I know that I have a family, a very large family, of a mother, her 3 grown daughters, a grown son, and a teenage son, all living together. However, when I look for them in the previous census, people are missing. They're all still living there in 1888, but it was because so many people reused the same names. I believe there were 3 Williams living in the house, 2 Roberts, and at least 2 daughters, or 2 women named Isabella. So when it was in the census, some of those people are missing, and I think it's because the enumerator did not realize there were multiple people with the same name. So having that second resource is very helpful for making sure that I can find these people and where they were living and when. So another thing that you can do when this, once you've started really doing some research, is to make a list of all of the documentation you would like to find. Documentation doesn't come cheap. If you're looking for birth, marriage, and death records, they're going to be in the county where those events took place. So if you have a family member that was born in Peoria but married in Tazewell County and died in Woodford, you're going to have to look through 30 different counties to find all of that information. But at the same time, if you have family that moved further away or they're from further away, you're going to have to research where those are found and where those records are kept. These records don't always come cheap. In Peoria County, if you're looking for a record and it meets the genealogical research criteria, that is to say, if it's a death certificate that's over 20 years old, if it's a birth certificate that's over 80 years old, I believe, and if it's a marriage certificate that's over 50 years old, you can send a request or go to the courthouse in person and file a request to get a genealogical copy for $5. That will be mailed to you. However, if you need a certified copy, that will cost you much more. I believe a birth certificate for a certified copy is $20. So it depends on how much money you have and how much you're willing to spend on a project like this. If you can find the information elsewhere, it may be helpful. But if you need the documentation, say to join a lineage society, then you need to make a list so that you know what you're looking for, and if you must, budget out how you're going to pay for it. Keep in mind, though, that records, while they are considered legal documents, they may not always be accurate. I would love to show you a couple of examples of documentation that I have. One of my favorites to show people is my great-grandmother, who my mom had always told me that she was born in Ireland and came over during the potato famine. When I first started researching, I discovered not only was she born in Peoria, but she was born 30 years after the potato famine. So it was probably her parents. So speaking back to the stories that we asked family for, it was probably my great-grandmother's parents, my great-great-grandparents, who came over during the potato famine, and they did come from Ireland. However, when Margaret was born, I always knew her name was Margaret. On her birth certificate, it lists her name as Maggie, not Margaret. She changed her name herself when she became a widow because I'm sure Margaret was more dignified than Maggie. It does list on here that she was born on Webster Street at 4 in the morning, but it does not actually give a date of birth. It gives the year, but no date. It names her parents, and this was filed December 3rd of 1880. That said, when we got her death certificate, which I also have, she lists her name as Margaret G. Rutherford. Well, she didn't, because she was dead. But her name is listed as Margaret G. I don't know where the G comes from, because everything I have says her middle name, if she ever used it, was Bridget. But it's listed as G, and it says that her birth date is December 4th. Well, her birth certificate was filed December 3rd, so December 4th is unlikely. Her obituary lists her birth date as November 3rd. Her Social Security benefits list her birth date as November 3rd. I'm not sure I will ever completely find out unless I find maybe a birth announcement in the paper, which I don't think her parents would have done, considering they were kind of poor. But this information, because it was given by my actual grandfather, it was not given by her, but somebody who was close to her. It could just be he had bad information. It could be that he wasn't thinking, he was grieving over his mother's death. I don't know why the information is inaccurate, but it is. A couple of other examples to show inaccuracies. My second great-grandfather, also born and died in Peoria. This is his death certificate, where the information is given by my great-grandfather. And in it, he says his parents, so my great-grandfather's grandparents were Patrick Ward from Cork, Ireland, and Anna Cashin from Cork, Ireland. Again, I have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, because everything that I have, including letters between that Patrick and his mother who stayed in Ireland, all of the information from his obituary, from his headstone, from other documentation that I found, says he was not from Cork, but County Westmeath. The two counties aren't the same. So where my great-grandfather got the information, I'm not sure. Furthermore, he would have been about 9 years old when his grandmother, this Anna Cashin, passed away, but all documentation says her name was Julia Murtha. So where does the name Anna Cashin come from? Who is she, and why is she listed? I have information of them getting married before my great-great-grandfather was born, so I don't know where this Anna comes from. My great-great-grandfather had two siblings, a sister and a brother. Unfortunately, his brother died before records were kept, and the sister on her record does not list her parents. So I will probably never know why Anna Cashin is listed as the mother, but this is why we have to research and find other ways and other avenues to verify this information. I still say his mother was Julia Murtha. Okay, another thing you're going to want to do to advance your family tree is to And this sounds silly perhaps, but make sure that you have more than one copy of your research and your documentation. I like to live by what's called the rule of 3, and that is to have 3 copies of your information. You have your first copy, which is all of your official records, your original pictures, your hard-fought research, anything that's original. That should be in a safe place in your home. It shouldn't be in a basement or in an attic somewhere where it gets too hot, too cold, damp. It should be well protected and safe. That is your coffee table kind of stuff. That's the stuff that you want to show other people who may be interested in your family tree, or if you're talking genealogy with somebody, this is your pride and joy to have these relics and such. Now, the second copy is what we call your working copy. That would be the copy that you take places when you're going to research. If you're going to the library, once the library is reopened to research, if you're going to a county courthouse, if you're going on a road trip to do some research and visit some cemeteries, this is the copy that you take with you that has the information you're going to be researching. Maybe not all your information, but the information you're planning on researching that day. Also, it's a copy because if something were to happen and you were to get separated from your research, perhaps you're down at the library and doing some research and you get a phone call that says you have to come home immediately. You grab your stuff, you're out the door, not realizing you left a binder of information. Unless you have a way to contact yourself if you were to leave it behind, so like a staff member were to find it, or if you were on your way somewhere and, God forbid, got in a car accident and had to go to the hospital and your car was taken to a dealership where it was left out overnight and it rained and your research was ruined, you don't want to have your originals in that. If something were to happen like the Washington tornado that hit several years ago and you were to lose your research, you want to have a second copy available. The third is something that you maybe put in a safe place that is not in your home in case of something, again, like the Washington tornado or a house fire, or I had a patron once tell me that they lost all their research in a bad divorce. The former spouse was apparently vindictive and burned the person's research, and they couldn't even go back and get it from the house. So I also recommend keeping a digital copy. Even if you aren't digital, you can always ask for help from somebody about digitizing your records. This keeps them online. A lot of my records are digital so that I can work from wherever I want and not have to have a pile of binders or which thing do I need with me today. Also, by using cloud technology, if one of my cousins says to me, hey, do you happen to have Grandma's obituary? Within a couple of minutes, I can shoot them off a digital copy of it without having to hunt down the binder that has it. So having multiple copies of your research, especially if you can do some digital and some paper, are always a great idea to have at hand. Another thing I'd like to recommend is that since you're getting serious and getting started in this, invest now in good supplies. Look for archival safe materials, things that you can use to preserve any family heirlooms that you might have, or pictures, or maybe you have some article of clothing or a family Bible. You want to make sure that you buy the right things to preserve that history so that you don't lose it. I have a lot of pictures that I inherited from a great aunt. Unfortunately, over time, a lot of them have faded and I cannot recover them. So the only thing I could do is I talked to an archivist friend of mine and I said, what can I do? She said, scan it once, put it away, protect it. And that's what I've done. And last but not least, if you're really, really stuck on your family history, or you don't think you can go further in your family history because you know there was a case of an adoption, or maybe there's a question of paternity, if you haven't already, I would really recommend doing some DNA research. Watch the commercial websites for a great sale. They usually have them every couple of months, and if you have to wait and save up for it, or you just don't have the funds, you can always ask maybe a family member for it for Christmas. They really go on sale around that time. And submit your DNA to one of the commercial websites and learn how to use DNA to solve your family mysteries. I can honestly recommend this book as a great guide to learning about it. It's The Family Tree Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy by Blaine Bettinger. I've actually met this guy in real life. He does a very good job explaining how DNA works and how to research with it. You can also join online groups and follow blogs and websites that have a lot of information about DNA. I myself am a big supporter of DNA because using DNA, I've managed to break a number of brick walls in my own family research that I never would have found the answers to without DNA. I just did not have the proper way to find them. I had family members. One of my favorite stories to tell about DNA is I have a great-great-grandmother who I knew was born in Ireland. She got married in Macomb and then came to Peoria and had 10 children. I could identify 8 of them, and then she died. And her obituary just mentions her husband and her children. It doesn't mention where she came from other than Ireland. It doesn't mention any siblings or any parents. And until I randomly ran into a cousin of mine, I was working at the library one day and I was helping a patron research, and I realized that we were third cousins. She was able to give me the death date, and that's how I found the obituary. That gave me no more information. But by using DNA, I was able to find other people that descended from her line, from her siblings, to discover that she had a sister living down the street when she died who was not mentioned in her obituary. I found that her parents had raised her in Fulton County. She had come over as a child. She spent a bit of time in New York. It was really quite fascinating information I never would have found if I had not done DNA and been matched up with people. So that's what I have for you today for intermediate genealogy tips and techniques. I hope you find this helpful, and I hope that once we can reopen our libraries and get back to research, that you're able to come into the Fond du Lac Library or the Peoria Public Library or any library you're researching at and get some answers and information you're looking for on your genealogy search. As always, you can always send an email to me to ask me any questions that you may have on this presentation, or put them in the comments below. Have a great day and keep researching. Bye.